They say love chooses us when we're least ready. But what if love chooses you the night before forever runs out? This is the story of a girl who was sold for a debt she didn't owe. Before we continue, grab your popcorn and subscribe. Ariel Vance had imagined her wedding day 1,000 times, but never like this. Not in a cathedral filled with strangers wearing polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Not in a dress that cost more than her family's house, heavy with diamonds she'd never asked for. And certainly not standing beside a man whose name she'd only learned 3 weeks ago, Ethan Salvatore. Even his name felt like glass in her mouth, sharp, cold, impossible to swallow. The vows were brief. His hand, when it touched hers, was steady. Hers trembled. The priest spoke words about love and devotion, and Ariel wanted to laugh, or scream, or run. But her father sat in the second row, hands folded, eyes lowered, and she knew why she was here. Debt. That's all she was, a payment in white silk. The reception blurred past her. Champagne, laughter, conversations she wasn't part of. Ethan didn't speak to her once. He stood near the tall windows, a glass of something dark in his hand, his sharp profile cutting through the golden light like a blade. People approached him, shook his hand, and he nodded without smiling, his presence so commanding that even silence felt like a statement. Ariel watched him and wondered what kind of man buys a wife and doesn't even look at her. When midnight came, she was led to a bedroom larger than any space she'd ever called her own. Rose petals covered the bed, their scent thick and cloying, almost mocking. She stood in the center of the room, still in her wedding dress, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened. Ethan stepped inside, and for the first time all day, their eyes met. His were dark, unreadable, carrying something between exhaustion and restraint. He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt her breath catch, unsure if she should speak or move or brace herself for whatever came next. Then he said quietly, "I'll be sleeping in the other room." Ariel blinked. "What?" "There are other rooms in this house. If this one doesn't suit you, you can choose another." His voice was calm, almost distant, like he was discussing furniture. "Good night." And then he left. She stood there, alone, staring at the closed door, her thoughts spinning. What kind of man marries a woman and walks away on their wedding night? She sank onto the edge of the bed, the diamonds on her dress catching the light, and wondered if she'd just been saved or insulted. On the nightstand, she noticed a small folded note. Her name was written on it in sharp, elegant handwriting. She opened it with shaking fingers. "Don't be afraid. Not tonight." Ariel read it twice, then a third time, trying to understand what it meant. Was it kindness? Control? A warning? She didn't know. But as she lay down that night, still in her wedding dress, staring at the ceiling of a house that didn't feel like hers, she realized something. She didn't know anything about the man she'd just married. And maybe that was the most terrifying part of all. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt heavy, like waiting for thunder after lightning. Ariel woke each morning in a bed too large for one person, in a room that smelled faintly of roses she hadn't asked for. A woman named Anne, the housekeeper, brought her tea and laid out clothes, soft cotton dresses that felt strange after years of wearing the same 3 outfits. Anne was kind but careful, her words measured, her eyes knowing in a way that made Ariel feel like she was being studied. Ethan was gone. Anne said he'd left on business the morning after the wedding and wouldn't be back for a few days. Ariel told herself she was relieved. She spent her time wandering the mansion, each hallway longer than the last, each room filled with furniture that looked like it had never been touched. There was a library with shelves that reached the ceiling, a dining hall that could seat 20, and windows everywhere, tall and clean, showing her a city she used to belong to, but could no longer reach. She missed her mother. She missed the cramped kitchen where they used to bake together, the sound of her mother humming while she kneaded dough. She missed her best friend, Amira, and the way they used to laugh about nothing at all. But most of all, she missed the version of herself that still believed she had a choice. On the third night, Anne found her sitting by the window in her room, staring at the stars. "You remind me of someone," Anne said quietly, setting down a tray of tea Ariel hadn't asked for. Ariel glanced at her. "Who?" Anne hesitated, then shook her head. "Someone who used to live here, a long time ago." "Ethan's wife?" The question slipped out before Ariel could stop it, and Anne's expression shifted, just barely. Sadness, maybe, or pity. "Yes," Anne said softly. "Valeria. She died years ago." Ariel looked back at the window. She'd heard the name whispered at the wedding, seen the way people glanced at Ethan when they thought he wasn't looking. A dead wife, a tragedy, a man who'd never recovered. "He loved her," Ariel said. It wasn't a question. Anne didn't answer, which was answer enough. When Anne left, Ariel stayed by the window, watching the city lights blink like distant stars, and wondered if she'd just married a ghost. Ethan returned on the fourth day. Ariel didn't see him arrive. She only knew he was back because the air in the house changed, became sharper, more deliberate, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence press in from all sides. And then, faintly, she heard it. Music. A piano, slow and haunting, each note falling like rain against glass. Ariel sat up, her heart quickening. The melody was beautiful, aching, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a house this cold. She slipped out of bed, barefoot, and followed it down the hallway, past doors she'd never opened, toward the east wing of the mansion. The music grew louder. She stopped at the entrance to a grand room, its walls lined with dark wood, its center dominated by a black piano that gleamed under the soft glow of a single lamp. And there he was. Ethan sat at the piano, his back to her, his fingers moving across the keys with a precision that felt almost effortless. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked unguarded. The music flowed from him like a language she didn't know, but could somehow understand. Grief, longing, something too deep to name. Ariel stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. And then, without turning, he spoke. "You don't have to hide." His voice cut through the music, calm but edged with something sharper. Ariel's breath caught. How long had he known she was there? "I wasn't hiding," she said, though her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Ethan's hands stilled on the keys. The silence that followed felt louder than the music. He turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the tired weight in his eyes. "I don't like being watched," he said simply. "Then maybe you shouldn't play so loud," Ariel replied before she could stop herself. For a second, she thought she'd made a mistake. But then his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to make her pulse skip. He stood, closing the piano with quiet finality, and walked past her without another word. His cologne lingered in the air, clean and sharp, like rain after a fire. Ariel stood there long after he was gone, her heart pounding, her thoughts tangled. She'd just seen something she wasn't supposed to see, and now she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen. It was early, the kind of quiet that felt fragile, and Ariel had come downstairs hoping to help Anne with breakfast, needing something to do with her hands. She didn't expect to see Ethan leaning against the counter, a cup of coffee in his hand, his gaze distant. When she walked in, he looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ariel felt pinned under his gaze, those dark eyes studying her in a way that made her feel seen and exposed all at once. She looked away first, her cheeks warming, and busied herself with the flour Anne had left out. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan," Anne said, bowing slightly. Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed on Ariel. She could feel him watching her as she tied her hair back, as she dusted flour across the counter, as she tried to pretend her hands weren't shaking. She didn't know why it felt so heavy, this silence between them, but it did. Finally, he set his cup down. "Breakfast," he said, his tone controlled, almost too controlled. Then he left. Ariel exhaled slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Anne glanced at her, something unreadable in her expression. "He's not what people think," she said quietly. Ariel looked at her. "Then what is he?" Anne smiled faintly. "That's for you to find out." Breakfast was strange. They sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat a dozen people, the space between them filled with the faint clinking of silverware and nothing else. Ariel tried to focus on her food, but she kept stealing glances at him, at the way he held his fork with the same precision he'd used on the piano keys, at the way his jaw tightened when he thought, at the shadows under his eyes that suggested he slept even less than she did. When he finished, he set his napkin down and looked at her. "You sing," he said. It wasn't a question. Ariel froze. "What?" "Last night, I heard you." His gaze was steady, unreadable. "You have a good voice." Heat flooded her face. She'd been singing to herself by the window, thinking no one could hear. "I didn't think anyone was listening." "I wasn't trying to," he said. Then, after a pause, "You can sing while I play, if you want." It sounded like an offer. It felt like a command. Before she could answer, he stood and walked toward the piano room. Ariel sat there, her heart racing, unsure if she should follow or stay. But her body made the choice before her mind could. She followed. He played, and she sang. At first, her voice was hesitant, unsure, but the melody he created was so achingly beautiful that she couldn't help but let herself fall into it. The notes wrapped around her like silk, and for the first time since her wedding, she forgot where she was. She forgot the debt, the arrangement, the cold distance. She only felt the music. When the song ended, Ethan's hands stilled on the keys. He didn't look at her. He simply stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out of the room without a word. Ariel stayed where she was, breathless, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. And she realized, with a sinking, terrifying certainty, that she was starting to care about a man who wouldn't let her in. That night, she couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way his hands had moved across the piano, the way his voice had sounded when he said, "You have a good voice." The way he'd looked at her that morning in the kitchen, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. She hated it, hated the way her thoughts kept circling back to him. He was her captor, the man who'd bought her freedom at the cost of her life. But he was also the man who played piano at 2 a.m. and left notes telling her not to be afraid. Ariel pressed her hands to her face, frustrated, confused, aching. She didn't want to feel anything for him, but she was starting to, and that scared her more than anything else. 2 weeks passed. They fell into a rhythm, strange and unspoken. Mornings in the kitchen, where they exchanged glances but rarely words. Afternoons, where Ariel wandered the mansion and Ethan worked in his study, the door always closed. Evenings by the piano, where music became the only language they shared. He never touched her, never asked her questions, never explained why he'd married her or what he wanted from her. But he noticed things. When she couldn't reach a book on the top shelf in the library, she found it on her nightstand the next morning. When she mentioned to Anne that she missed baking, flour and sugar appeared in the kitchen. When she sat by the window one night, shivering because she'd forgotten to close it, she woke the next morning to find it locked, a blanket draped over her shoulders. He never said anything, never took credit, but Ariel knew, and it made everything harder. Then, one night, everything changed. Ariel was walking back to her room after another evening by the piano when she saw her. A woman, standing at the end of the hallway, half hidden in shadow, watching her. Ariel froze, her breath catching. The woman was beautiful, hauntingly so, with pale skin and dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. She wore a long black coat, and her eyes, even from a distance, were sharp, piercing, filled with something Ariel couldn't name. Anger, pain, recognition. "Who are you?" Ariel whispered. The woman didn't answer. She just stared, her expression unreadable, and then, slowly, she turned and disappeared down the hallway. Ariel's heart pounded. She ran after her, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, but when she reached the end of the hall, the woman was gone. Only the faint scent of perfume remained, expensive, elegant, and achingly familiar. Ariel stood there, trembling, her mind racing. She'd seen a ghost, or something worse. The next morning, she found Ethan in his study. She didn't knock. She just pushed the door open, her pulse still racing from the night before. Ethan looked up from his desk, his expression calm, but something flickered in his eyes when he saw her face. "Who is she?" Ariel demanded. He didn't pretend not to understand. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing. "Someone who's supposed to be dead," he finally said, his voice low, controlled. Ariel's breath hitched. "Your wife?" Ethan's gaze darkened. "Yes." "But she's alive." "Yes." Ariel stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know," Ethan said, and for the first time, she heard something crack in his voice. "Not until now." He stood, running a hand through his hair, his composure fracturing. "Valeria died 3 years ago. Or so I thought. There was an accident, a car crash. They found her body." "Then who did I see last night?" "I don't know," Ethan said, and the way he said it, the raw, helpless edge in his voice, made Ariel's chest tighten. He wasn't lying. He was as lost as she was. "She's been watching me," Ariel whispered, "for days. I thought I was imagining it." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Stay in the house. Don't go anywhere alone." "Why? What does she want?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for her. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I won't let her hurt you." It was the first time he'd said anything like that. The first time he'd acknowledged that she mattered, and it terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. Valeria came to her 3 days later. Ariel was in the garden trying to clear her head when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze. She turned, and there she was. Valeria stood a few feet away, her expression cold, her eyes sharp with something between hatred and grief. "You shouldn't be here," Valeria said, her voice soft but venomous. Ariel's pulse spiked. "I didn't have a choice." "Neither did I." Valeria stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate. "He told you I was dead, didn't he?" Ariel nodded, unable to speak. "He wanted me gone," Valeria continued, her voice trembling. "He couldn't handle the guilt, so he erased me. And now he's replaced me with you." "That's not true," Ariel said, though she didn't know if she believed it. Valeria laughed, bitter and broken. "You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of." "And you do?" Valeria's expression twisted. "I loved him. I gave him everything. And he let me die." "Then why are you here?" Ariel asked, her voice shaking. "If he wanted you gone, why come back?" Valeria's eyes gleamed with something dark. "Because he doesn't get to be happy. Not after what he did." And then she was gone, disappearing into the trees like smoke. Ariel stood there, trembling, her mind racing. She didn't know what to believe anymore. That night, she confronted Ethan. "She says you wanted her dead." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's lying." "Then tell me the truth." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw him waver. Valeria and we weren't happy. Not at the end. She wanted things I couldn't give her, a life I couldn't live. So you let her go? No, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I tried to save her. When the accident happened, I did everything I could. But she was gone. They told me she was gone. Ariel's chest ached. Then how is she here? I don't know, Ethan whispered. But someone brought her back, and they want me to suffer. Ariel stared at him, searching his face for lies, for cracks, for anything. But all she saw was pain. And she realized, with a sinking, terrible certainty, that she believed him. The truth came 3 days later. Ariel found the documents in Ethan's study, tucked inside a drawer she wasn't supposed to open. Contracts, agreements, letters, and one name repeated over and over. Leonard Hendricks. Her blood ran cold. Leonard was her father's cousin, the man who'd saved her family from debt, the man who'd arranged her marriage. Ariel's hands shook as she read through the papers. Leonard hadn't just orchestrated the marriage. He'd orchestrated everything. The debt, the pressure, the timeline. He'd known Ethan was sick. No. She dropped the papers, her breath coming in short gasps. Ethan was dying. The words on the page blurred together. Terminal brain tumor. 6 months. Maybe less. Leonard had forced her into a marriage with a dying man so he could seize the Salvatore Empire when Ethan was gone. And her father had helped him do it. Ariel didn't remember leaving the study. She didn't remember walking to her father's house, didn't remember the cab ride or the way her hands shook the entire way. But she remembered the look on her father's face when she confronted him. Guilt, cowardice, shame. You sold me, she whispered. You sold me to a dying man. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. I didn't have a choice. Leonard owns everything. The house, the business, everything. He said if I didn't, you did have a choice. Ariel's voice cracked. You could have said no. You could have fought, but you didn't. You traded me for your own survival. Her father flinched. Ariel. Don't! She stepped back, tears burning her eyes. Don't say my name. You don't get to. She left, and she didn't look back. When she returned to the mansion, Ethan was waiting for her. He stood in the entryway, his expression unreadable, but the moment he saw her face, something shifted. You know, he said quietly. Ariel nodded, unable to speak. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. I wanted to tell you. I tried, but... How long? She interrupted, her voice shaking. 6 months. Maybe less. Ariel's chest tightened. And Leonard? He's been planning this for years. He found out about my diagnosis through my doctor, a man named Luca Grande. Leonard paid him to leak the information. Ariel closed her eyes, the pieces falling into place. So he forced me into this marriage, knowing you'd die. And when you did, he'd take everything. Yes. And Valeria? Ethan's jaw clenched. Leonard faked her death, kept her hidden, fed her lies about me. He's been using her to destroy me from the inside out. Ariel stared at him, her heart breaking. Why didn't you fight him? Because I was already dying, Ethan said, his voice raw. What was the point? The point, Ariel whispered, stepping closer, is that you deserved better. We both did. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw his walls crumble. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. For all of it. For dragging you into this. For not being able to give you the life you deserved. Ariel's tears fell freely now. You didn't drag me into anything. Leonard did. My father did. But you She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling.
You tried to protect me. Even when you were dying, you tried.
Ethan's hand closed around hers, warm and solid, and for the first time since they'd met, he pulled her close. They stood there, in the middle of the grand entryway, holding each other like they were the only two people left in the world. And maybe, in that moment, they were. Valeria came to her one last time. It was late, the house silent, and Ariel found her standing in the garden, her face pale, her eyes hollow. "You love him," Valeria said. It wasn't a question. Ariel didn't deny it.
Yes.
Valeria's expression twisted, pain and anger warring in her eyes.
I loved him first. I know,
Ariel said softly.
And I'm sorry. For everything Leonard did to you. For the lies he told you.
Valeria's composure cracked.
He told me Ethan wanted me dead. That he paid for the accident. That he'd moved on. None of it was true, Ariel said. Ethan never stopped grieving you. Leonard used that. He used both of us.
Valeria's hands trembled.
I wasted so much time hating him. Then don't waste any more, Ariel said gently. Let him go. Let yourself go.
For a long moment, Valeria said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded.
Take care of him, she whispered, for as long as you can.
And then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Ariel never saw her again. They remarried 2 weeks later, not because they had to, not because of debt or obligation or Leonard's plans, but because they chose to. It was small, private, just the two of them and a single witness. No cathedral, no strangers, no diamonds. Just Ariel and Ethan, standing together in the garden, speaking vows they wrote themselves. I don't have forever, Ethan said, his voice steady but soft. But I'll give you every moment I have left. And I'll love you with all of them. Ariel's tears fell freely.
I don't need forever. I just need you. For as long as we have.
They kissed, slow and tender, and for the first time, Ariel felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That night, they made love for the first time, not out of obligation, but out of choice, out of love. And when Ariel woke the next morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows, she turned to Ethan, smiling. But he didn't move. His hand was still holding hers, warm, but still. Too still.
Ethan?
She whispered. He didn't answer. Ariel's breath caught.
Ethan?
Nothing. She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. But she already knew. He was gone. A sob tore from her throat, raw and broken, and she collapsed against him, holding him like she could bring him back, like love alone could rewrite the ending. But it couldn't. On the nightstand, she saw it. An envelope with her name. With shaking hands, she opened it. My Ariel, if you're reading this, then I'm sorry. I wanted to give you forever, but time had other plans. You gave me something I thought I'd lost. Hope. You reminded me what it felt like to live, not just survive. And for that, I will love you past every dawn, past every ending, past forever itself. The empire is yours. The house is yours. Everything I have is yours. Not because I'm gone, but because you deserve it. Live, Ariel. Live the life I couldn't give you, and know that wherever I am, I'm still loving you. Forever yours, Ethan. Ariel clutched the letter to her chest, her tears falling onto the paper, and she let herself break. 6 months later, Ariel stood in the headquarters of Salvatore Enterprises, her hand resting on the curve of her stomach. She was pregnant. A boy, the doctor had told her. Healthy, strong. She hadn't known, not until 2 months after Ethan's death. But when she'd seen the test, she'd collapsed, sobbing, because he'd left her something. A piece of him that would live on. Leonard Hendricks was in prison. Reed Saint, the journalist who'd been investigating the Hendricks empire for months, had exposed everything. The blackmail, the manipulation, the lies. Leonard's empire had crumbled overnight. Her father had tried to reach out. Ariel hadn't answered. Some wounds didn't heal, and she was done sacrificing herself for people who'd never valued her. Now, she stood at the head of the conference table, the board of directors watching her with wary respect. Salvatore Enterprises will no longer operate the way it did under my husband's father, Ariel said, her voice steady. We will rebuild, ethically, honestly, and we will honor the man who built this company with integrity. The board nodded. Ariel looked at the portrait of Ethan hanging on the wall, his sharp eyes, his quiet strength, and she smiled through her tears. You gave me more than time, she whispered. You gave me a reason to live. And as she walked out of the room, her hand on her stomach, she felt it. A flutter, a kick. Life, moving forward, even after the dawn. If this story touched you or reminded you of someone, drop "forever" in the comments. Like, subscribe, bell on. Next story might just explain how you feel. See you at dawn. Subscribe!